Hello, this is Susan Duclos and my partner Stefan Stanford. With us today, we have the honor of being joined by financial insider V, the Guerrilla Economist. We've been documenting V's warnings for months, including his predictions on Banker's death after just the first two, which, as he predicted, many more followed. So without further ado, V, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Susan and Stefan, it's a pleasure for me to be on with both of you guys, as well as your listening audience. It's an honor and a privilege. Thank you. Thank you so much.
V, thanks so much for being here. Welcome. About 2 months ago, you gave us a major confirmation from a source of yours, a four-star general, of things to come, including the undermining of the U.S. dollar by 2015, the end of the U.S. by 2017, and a complete reordering of the world. We would love to know what you have to follow up on with that.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Stefan. It was about 2 months ago that I had a four-star general from the United States Air Force contact me. This is a rising star. He was a total, fighter jock at one time of his life, a real rising star in the Air Force. Contact me because honestly, the guy was freaked out and he wants to get the heck out of the country. And he was looking into, getting out to south of the equator, so to speak. And I'm in the process of getting all that stuff set up for him and his family to expatriate themselves out of here. He was so concerned and so shaken by what he was made privy to that it completely rattled his thinking. This is a guy who's not scared of pretty much anything. This is a man who has a very steel resolve. He's somebody who is, very not a guy to be trifled with either, or somebody who's easily intimidated. But he was so shaken that the guy's like, what, V, I got to get out of here. And here's the deal. And he laid out the entire plan, which was later confirmed by some other sources as well, which I'll get into later in the program. But basically what the generals say, and I still remember that night, having that conversation as I wrote everything down. As the guy was speaking, I'm just like sitting there, and the sense of somberness was so heavy. It was so like unbelievable, because this is not a guy who would just call you just to shoot the breeze. He wasn't calling you to tell you about nonsense. When you have somebody of that caliber, that high of a rank, calling you, you need to pay attention. And I immediately started paying attention and I started taking notes. And when I started taking notes, I was like, my God, this is unbelievable information that I'm hearing. And what the general has said is this. He said, by 2015, by the end of 2015, the United States dollar will be completely undermined. Okay, now does that translate to that's it? The dollar's done as world reserve, status. Does that translate to a dollar collapse by the end of 2015? Obviously not, because he says by 2017, two years later, the United States as we have come to know it will cease to exist. So a couple of things are at play that, let's just hone in on the 2015 date here. When he's talking about the United States dollar being completely undermined, what he was getting at is that many nations throughout the world would not want to use the United States dollar as a settlement for trade in either food or energy. Okay, and since 2008, there's been an accelerating trend of nations globally that no longer want to trade in the dollar. They don't care for the dollar. Okay, and folks, you got to understand one thing. The powers that be, the people that are in charge of the United States, those who are running the show, okay, these guys, to the average individual, to the average man on the street, or somebody who is learned or educated in how things work, so to speak, will look at the bumbling, stumbling nature of the leadership of the United States and say to themselves, well, these guys are just making stupid mistakes. These are just idiots. And maybe if we vote these idiots out, the next crop of guys could go ahead and start fixing the problem. That is not a case. These guys are not making stupid mistakes here. When you have one or two things that occur, you have a stupid mistake. You have a coincidence of a stupid mistake. But when you have multiple things, thousands of little events that have occurred since 2008, thousands of little events that are happening successively, one after the other, you no longer have a group of bumbling, stumbling idiots that they're playing themselves out to be. You have a massive agenda. And that's the thing that people need to understand here. There's no bumbling here. Everything's being orchestrated precisely. And it's heading us to that 2015 dollar undermining date. And I will explain. I'm going to put some teeth into this thing and put some bones onto the meat of this argument. And that is this, okay? Look at the moves that this administration has done against the Ukraine. When the Ukraine things started, occurred back in March, I say, you know what? Ukraine is the place where the petrodollar dies. It's where the dollar goes to die. I've said it. A couple of the pundits have said it as well. I also said that come mid to late July, there's going to be a Russian counteroffensive. And in fact, there was, but it's been covert. But what's been happening is with Ukraine, as it was with Syria before it, winds up being an embarrassment for the United States, winds up being a situation where the nations of the world stand up and say, wait a minute, these people are insane. These people are off their rocker. These people have lost their marbles. Why are we allowing them to dictate the flow of money and dictate the flow of politics globally? Why are we allowing that? And you see the backlash from the Syrian debacle. You see the backlash from the Ukraine. You're seeing the backlash that's even right now occurring with ISIS. What's been happening? Well, nations of the world says, screw the dollar. We're done. And they're getting on board with the Russians, the Chinese. They're getting on board with BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And I always say this, if you limit the membership of the BRICS just to the 5 nations that make up that acronym, you do yourself a disservice. Every time you hear the word BRICS, we're talking about over 105 countries that have come to an agreement or consensus that they don't need the dollar. Okay, that's number one. You have organizations like Global South, which is South America, Africa, and in the Middle East. They're saying, hey, we're done. And their economies are booming. They don't want to be a part of of the whole entire petrodollar scheme and the king dollar agenda here. Okay, you have the Eurasian trade zones. You have the SEO, the Shanghai cooperative over there. And these are all various trade negotiations and trade zones. You have RESET, one of the other large trade zones. In other words, folks, the largest economies on the planet are geosynchronistically realigning themselves away from the United States as the central nexus of all global trade and the United States dollar. They're done. And every single turn that the leadership of this nation, of our nation, does, it embarrasses us. It's bringing shame to us. We're looking like idiots. We're looking like irrational bullies. We're looking like absolute, reckless, evil people. And the world says enough's enough. And when you have, I mean, look at the recent fine against BNP, that BNP Paribas, the largest bank in France, that Eric Gunwalker, Fast and Furious Holder, has done against BNP. They fined BNP $10 billion. The problem is BNP only makes about $7 billion after taxes. Then they renegotiated and said, okay, fine, you can't pay $10 billion here, just pay $8.4 billion. And BNP is like, well, you got to be kidding me. And then the stipulations by the State Department is, not only are we going to fine you, but you are to be barred from using the dollar in any sort of transactions for an unspecified amount of time. And then BNP says, okay, you want us not to use the dollar? That's fine and dandy. We just won't. And there's been a backlash by a lot of French bankers as well as industrialists who have said, and politicians who said, you know what, we don't need the dollar. And as soon as BNP made that stance, what happened next? Well, you had Total Petroleum. Now, who the heck is Total? Total is the second largest oil company in Europe after Royal Dutch Shell, and it's the fourth largest oil company in the world. And the CEO of Total says, hey, what's the point of having a petrodollar? What is the point? We don't need it. There's no reason for the oil to be priced in dollars. There's no reason for it. These are huge, massive shots. And then you have, on the backdrop of this entire thing, the $400 billion energy deal between the Russians and the Chinese, the energy deals between the Indians, the Iranians, and the Turks, the massive trade groups that are reforming. And this is what's when that general said by the end of 2015 the United States dollar will be undermined, this is the undermining process. This is it. The Russians and Chinese saying, hey, we need to find an alternative to SWIFT, which they're doing. China's UnionPay, which is technically the biggest credit card company on the planet that makes about as much, if not more, than Visa, MasterCard, they're offering their networks and their services over to the Russians and to the rest of Asia. These are massive realignments that not many people are paying attention to. But every single successive event that's been happening week after week after week after week is bringing about an end to the dollar. We're keeping the dollar afloat simply by two things. Number one, manipulation. There's no reason in heck for the dollar to be as high as it is right now. And number two, because of the manipulation, it is causing those who are frightened in Europe because of the debacle in the Eurozone to come into the dollar as some sort of a safe haven. So they're propping it up. And in unison to prop it up, what are they doing? They're pushing the Dow up to 17,000 points, which the Dow has no business being that high. So this is all a setup for a massive crash, massive blowback, and by 2015, the dollar will be undermined. I seriously believe that. The other thing that the general has said, he said by 2017, the United States, as we know, will no longer exist. And he said that press and media packets have already been prepared and they will begin to roll out. Now, the reason why this general came forward is this. This guy was tapped, by the Obama administration to go ahead and replace Dempsey as the Joint Chiefs. When he was hit with a FISA contract, this FISA contract was lifetime. It wasn't 2 year, it wasn't 5 year or 10 or 20. It was a lifetime FISA contract that stated that he should be bold enough to give the orders to shoot and kill American citizens on American soil. And that just shook him to the core. And he was so angry, he was led out of Langley by armed guards. Okay? So that was the catalyst for him to come out. So the 2017, he said, the American, as we know it, will no longer exist. The press packets have been prepared. They're all ready to go. And he said this whole illegals that are coming in, that's been part of the plan for the last 11 to 12 years in order to collapse the economy and bring in the chaos. Okay, he said what they're going to do pretty much is when the crap does hit the fan and the systems begin to break down, that there will be such an incredible amount of chaos within the United States. It will be pretty much taking a whole bunch of drugged up people, locking them in a room and having them kill each other. That's pretty much what it's going to wind up being. It's going to be Mad Max, Road Warrior. That's kind of like what we're looking at in terms of lawlessness. Now, on top of that, we've had predictive computer models. I've taken in some of this data. Michael Rosecliffe, my colleague who runs the Looking Glass program, is one of the most effective software in the world, far more advanced than WebBots, has also confirmed the general's data that we are looking at a 2017 total collapse time frame window. The general also went on to say that they're going to go ahead and finish the Silk Road, which is, as we speak, is being worked on right now. The general also said, watch out for bioweapons releases. Okay, and he said the stuff that we're seeing with pneumonic plague and Ebola, these are going to be the beta tests. They're watching how things respond. The example that the general said was that imagine if you take a 33-ounce can of Folgers coffee, you take it to some place such as the Cross Bronx Expressway right by the George Washington Bridge in New York. You open it up, you got a 3 to 4 mile an hour headwind. You're talking about 25 million dead in about 3 to 4 days. And then anybody who tries to find the signature, the weapon signature of this bioagent, they won't be the signature. He said will not be recognized. This way, it gives whoever released it complete and total plausible deniability. There is no reason, folks, no reason for this guy to come forward and tell me all this. Okay, there's no reason. This is a person who's had a very successful military career, and for him to come out like this, where he wants to exit stage left, that's sombering. Okay, if I had somebody named Billy who lives in his mother's garage gave me a call and said this thing, I'd probably laugh at him. But being a 4-star United States Air Force general, letting me know about what's going on, that information just completely floored me. And then the funny thing is, it was later confirmed by Rick Wiles, who he met somebody who actually knew my general source and confirmed the whole entire thing. So you got double confirmation there. So this is what we're facing, folks. This is what we're facing, and that's what the general said.
Well, it does make sense that he'd come forward. I mean, those that are loyal did vow to protect Americans, so coming forward is probably his way to try and do what he can to do so. Without asking for dates or ranges or anything like that, I wanted to ask you, what kind of signs, I mean, you're telling us everything that we're seeing, and you put it in excellent lineup so that we can see this is what was being talked about back then. For people out there that, they're running around in their regular lives and they're not paying any attention to any of this, what kind of signs should we be looking for now and in the coming months as indicators that this plan, this agenda, this orchestrated plan is moving forward just as it has been?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's a couple of signs. The first sign that you want to look forward to is this blowback from Ukraine. Okay, that's going to the whole Ukraine situation, folks. I mean, I confirmed it last night from 2 intelligence sources that I spoke to. We actually have French as well as German, call them troops, you can call them special ops, you can call them personnel. They are actually fighting with the pro-Russian rebels against the Ukrainian army and the established proxy government in Kiev. This was confirmed to me last night by 2 intelligence sources. They also confirmed, that indeed there has been Blackwater XC or Academy, whatever they're calling themselves this week, personnel that were captured and are being interrogated. I know this was confirmed by another pundit with his source, but I can corroborate that. I mean, when I first heard about it, I said, this sounds pretty outlandish. It sounded not outlandish, but it sounded incredible. So I put the feelers out to my 2 sources, and they did in fact corroborate that word, that bit of info. So that's going to be a sign, because the United States are starting to look like an aggressor. I want you to think about this for a second. For the French and the Germans to give lip service to the Americans and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, sure, we'll do whatever you want in Ukraine, and yeah, we'll bomb ISIS with you, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, they are covertly sending troops to fight against American interests in the Ukraine. That tells me 2 things. Number one, they're not going to cut their own throats and get involved in a suicide pact with the Americans against the Russians and have the flow of natural gas, which is so integral, so important to their economies in Europe. They're not going to do that. They're not going to risk put their neck on the line for America. Not this time. That's number one. Number two, it tells me that NATO is dead. Okay, that this American version, this Americanized and American influenced NATO, it's dead. All right, so that's what that tells me, and that's a huge sign. The second sign is you look at the nonsense, and let's be honest here. ISIS is probably one of the worst kept secrets here. The world has gotten privy to who Al Qaeda is, and the world is privy to who ISIS is. Okay, they're starting to realize, hey, there's a link between Benghazi, the Free Syrian Army, and ISIS and Al Qaeda. There's a serious link there, and the world's starting to get awoken to that. There's also the realization that they're not really hitting ISIS. They're hitting toothpaste factories and toilet paper facilities. They're not really doing anything to really get at ISIS. In fact, the oil fields that they hit were Syrian oil fields. Okay, they did not belong to ISIS. Why? Because ISIS has been given control of Iraqi oil fields, okay, in order to take the Iraqi oil fields, and they've been selling it on the black market at 60% of the value of oil. They're selling it for a 40% discount. And they're doing this trying to bring the price of oil down, because bringing the price of oil down hurts the Russian economy. So ISIS is a proxy that is being used by the U.S. to bring down the price of petroleum and oil that will hurt the Russians. But what the Americans don't realize, oil prices tumbling lower doesn't hurt the Russians as much as it would hurt the Saudis. And the Saudis are getting concerned about this whole thing, because they're like, wait a minute, you're selling Iraqi oil on the black market, which is a problem, because that's one of the beef that Saudi Arabia had with Iraq initially, by selling when the Iraqis were not only selling their oil in euros, but they were actually selling it cheaper than the Saudis. It's a big problem. So now ISIS is doing the same thing, and the Saudis already have had their feelings hurt when the U.S. abandoned them back in October 2013 over the whole Syria debacle in the first place. Folks, the reality why Saudi Arabia is spurned is this. Saudi Arabia is not producing the type of oil that they say that they do. In other words, they're running low. Every single inside source I've consulted have told me that the Saudis' biggest well, the Ghawar well, okay, founded in 1948, it's one of 6 major wells in Saudi Arabia. It's pumping in 80 to 90% water, okay, and 10% oil. And the majority are pulling into those drills in order to add oil. It's mostly water coming back out. And that is why in the last 15 years, when confronted and asked repeatedly, hey, Saudi Arabia, how much oil do you have? They've always stalled. They never allowed inspection of their wells. They never get out any proper assays. They never did any sort of proven reserves, nothing. And they've always said, hey, we'll increase more production as the price of oil escalates. And then they come out and say, hey, we like oil being at $70. Nothing below that. Anything below that will harm us. Well, if you're an energy kingpin, why are you worried about lower priced oil? Unless, of course, you're not producing that much oil. And if you're an energy kingpin like Saudi Arabia, why are you involved in an energy war against Syria? Unless, of course, you don't have the type of oil you say, or the amount of oil that you say that you do. These are things that people need to take notice. It's a big sign. Also with Israel supporting al-Nusra, providing them air cover so they can go into Lebanon to offset Hezbollah. And folks, let's be honest here. Let's get it out on the table. Let's get it out in the open. Hamas is a creature that was created by Mossad. Okay, Hamas is see, you got to understand, every single one of these corrupt Western governments, and folks, I'm not talking about East versus West here, because they all got their own problems. But let's just focus on the West for a second here. Okay, America has what? America has Al Qaeda and Al Qaeda 2.0, which is also known as ISIS. The Brits have the Muslim Brotherhood, and Israel has Hamas. Hamas was created as a counterweight to Hezbollah. And every time that Israel needs a terrorist attack that conveniently ratchets up and strengthens their power of the state and gives them the pretext needed to go and hit targets outside of their borders that are threats to their national security, Hamas provides that. And here's Israel providing air cover for al-Nusra, which is also made up of Hamas operatives, okay, going into Syria, going into Lebanon. And when Syria goes after al-Qaeda, what did Israel do? Israel shoots down Syria's Su-24 Frogfoot, which is an air-to-ground plane, and that plane was absolutely tearing up al-Qaeda holdouts, and Israel shoots the plane down deep into Syrian territory. I mean, come on. You know, the Americans must have been blind. You know, the majority of Americans are too busy watching reality television, all the stupid stuff on TV. But the rest of the world is starting to figure it out. And they're starting to realize, hey, you know what? Instead of us going along with this, let's get to the weak underside belly. The weak underside belly of this monster is economics. You look at the G7. Who is the G7? It is the list, it is the club of the most insolvent, broke, insignificant nations on the planet who think they got money and power. They have nothing. And what the rest of the world is doing is they're not going to sit idly by and let this happen. China and Russia are moving with, of course, the rest of the BRICS, Global South, SCO, and they're moving very quickly for a post-dollar world and a post-American world, and that's where we're heading.
Post-American world.
Yes, sir. Relocation expert Joel Skousen, I believe I'm saying his name right, recently stated that there was going to be a nuclear war prior to the collapse of the U.S. dollar. What do you think about that?
Not at all. Not at all. There's no need for that.
Okay.
There's no need for it. I mean, here's the deal. People were looking for a massive Russian response, and I was looking for it as well. I was like, where's that Russian response? I didn't realize until my intelligence sources that the response has been going on quickly and covert. Putin need a big push to Kiev. He could take Kiev tomorrow night if he wanted to. He made mention of that. You know, he could take Kiev tomorrow night if he wanted to, and he made mention of that of former president of the EU, Barroso. He let it be known to him. I would the Chinese and the Russians risk in total nuclear war. He just absolutely carve us up like a turkey economically. Break a nation economically. And folks, I want you to put your critical thinking caps on for a second, okay? What happened in a government shutdown when they were doing sequestering? How many sections of the military were shut down? How many aircraft carriers couldn't move? And that's just a sequester. What happened done? When dollars no longer in patrol, a country that has reserve currency, this can no longer afford to pay for oil. You can't move an army. You can't move equipment. You can't even feed an army. And what's this country going to do? Go to a war, a side onslaught against Russians and Chinese allies? What do you do back?
Z.
Yeah.
Welcome back, V. We had some technical difficulties with the sound here, just as you were getting into some really heavy stuff. So we apologize for that, and welcome back.
Oh, it's great to be back.
Okay, you had mentioned as one of the things you were talking about to watch out for as a sign of bioterrorism. And sure, the 25 million in 3 to 4 days, we all know that's possible, especially if you put it in a huge city. Right now, though, we're seeing everything from this EV68 attacking children. Now it's in 38 states. Smallpox vials being found, 300 vials of other pathogens. Ebola in West Africa. Are we seeing that part of the plan right now starting to play out?
I mean, we have a source of Ebola. It's a totally different strain than what's out there. There's a lot of hype and mongering out there with this latest strain of Ebola. I mean, you got in unverified knowledge. Oh, it's already here. It's everywhere. This whole Ebola thing's been going back till February is when it started, and since February till now, we have around 2,000 some odd people dead total. You have a lot of hype coming out saying, "Oh, it's millions dead. The morgues are overfilling with bodies." Well, folks, you got to understand. Look, as somebody who spent his time in commodity trading, somebody who was involved in strategic metals, where I literally you'd have to get down to Africa and people pretty familiar with that part of the world, especially when you're running operations from the Africa over Zimbabwe, South Africa, and back into Europe. That was my old stomping grounds. Ebola spreads so ridiculously fast in places like that. Well, first of all, it's a petri dish out there. Okay, you have certain cultures out there that literally they come off the field from working. They're all watching the same basin, all around and eating their foods with it. In other words, you have sanitation that are major. Ebola likes stuff. Diseases love stuff like that. It's dark, humid. It's hot. It prefers that type of a climate. That's why you don't see Ebola in the Middle East for survival out there. Okay. Then when you look at the fact that you have an area that's pretty much right now massive saturation, right? About 7% saturation with cell. Got so many people dying. Where are all the cell photos? Where is it? Where are the videos being uploaded to Twitter, on Facebook? You don't have that. But they're allowing the mainstream media to spin some of the fear monger and the alternative media to run with it without any fact checking. Some stupid like, oh, it's Central America. They're going to come across the border. They're looking to hug Americans. I mean, come on. That's not it. What they're doing with Ebola, they're hyping it up. They're fear mongering it. They're letting a good chunk of the alternative media run with it just to see people's responses. That's the big one. It's going to be from a demonic plague. It's going to be this year's flu. Watch those things. Watch those things and how they spread. Another thing you need to be look at that respiratory illness that's hospitalized thousands of. That's coming from south of the border, folks.
EV68, yeah.
Correct. That's coming from absolutely. That's coming from south of the border. That's all the dreamers, Susan and Stefan. That's all the dreamers coming here, and they're spreading their dreams upon all of us. And you got American kids getting sick.
Yep.
What's going on? That's also part of the plan. This is like one thing after the next, after the next, after the next. But the big one's coming, and that's going to happen right after a dollar. They're going to collapse it, release the bioweapons. Then you're going to see chaos, because one of the things the general says, they will close down. They will cancel all passports, and they will close down the ports and the airports and the shipping ports, because in times of collapse, people with means, what they usually do is they'll the skipper, and they'll get a sort of a boat, get them off land. Well, they got patrol boats. They'll make sure that those boats are sent right by. This one thing pops off, and if you're looking to either get to your bug out location, or if my best advice to those with family, if you can get the heck out of the country, you got until 2016.
Well, we really got 7 pages of notes here. You have given us so much to work with and so much for the audience to think about, to watch, to research, to look up for themselves, because everything you've stated you can see in different headlines here and there, just nobody actually puts it together so that somebody looks at the big picture. We're still having a few issues with the sound here. Again, I think it's because I do think it's because of the subject matter, but hey, I could be a conspiracy theorist here. We want to thank you so much for agreeing to this interview.
No problem.
Yeah, V, thank you so much. Again, I wanted to
Oh, it's my
close.
pleasure.
I wanted to mention one thing in closing. The Georgia Guidestones has gotten a lot of press recently over a new 2014 block that was added to it. There's been a lot of talk of depopulation, and I think what you had just brought up about the collapse of the dollar and then something coming probably fits in there perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Haven't got a chance to look at that Georgia Guidestone. Um, and I don't know what the recent thing says, but that's their agenda right there. A global pop in perpetual balance with nature.
It's all part of the plan, like you said. It's all been orchestrated, huh?
At this point, Stefan and Susan, there is no such coincidence anymore. You can take coincidence and chuck it out the window. Every little thing that you, audience members, will be hearing, take it, listen to it, find out what it is, and don't get sense. There's nothing these days that happens by accident. It's very sophisticated, and it's orchestrated with such precision. Don't take it idle. Be proactive.
You got it. We will, and that's one heck of a way to end this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Wonderful to speak with you.
It's my pleasure, guys. Definitely will do.